Thank you, Tor, for that. The US, German and Swedish embassies as well as the British High Commission were key foreign missions that influenced multi-party democracy in Kenya. Former US envoy Smith Hempston, former German envoy Bernd Mutzelberg and former Swedish envoy Vils Sivelius never played quiet diplomacy. Hempston was the face of the diplomatic community in the push for reforms. Hempston's admirers praised him as one of the heroes of the Second Liberation, while his critics accused him of being partisan and biased towards the opposition. As Kenya marks the 30th anniversary of multi-party democracy, our senior political affairs reporter Patrick Amimo revisits the past and tells us how diplomats back then influenced reforms. Take a look.
In June 1982, the National Assembly amended the Constitution, making Kenya officially a one-party state. The 1988 elections, carried through King's system, reinforced the one-party system. In November 1989, President George Herbert Walker Bush appointed Smith Hempston U.S. ambassador to Kenya days after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The U.S. had become a global policeman and had started pushing African countries toward democracy and human rights. The Soviet Union had fallen, largely due to the radical reforms President Mikhail Gorbachev had implemented. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag flew over the Kremlin in Moscow for the last time. The wind of change, reform and democracy started blowing from Eastern Europe and swept across the globe. Hempston said he thought his major concern in Kenya would be environment and wildlife conservation. Soon after arrival in December 1989, Hempston said he began to understand the level of corruption, the gross human rights abuse, and the heavy-handed way in which the government dealt with those agitating for democracy. In his address to the Nairobi Rotarians in May 1990, Hempston took the bull by the horns and said there is a strong tide flowing through Congress to concentrate America's economic assistance to nations that nourish democratic institutions, defend human rights, and practice multi-party politics. He said, when I came to Kenya, the global movement towards democratization had already begun in Eastern Europe. It was inevitable that the idealism and agitation for change would reach here too.
The concept of democracy being anti-Soviet, it was taken up by the West. And the leading countries, so the most influential countries in Kenya during that time were, of course, traditional ones, the United Kingdom, Germany, and all led by the United States.
The first Sabasa rally on July 7, 1990 in Nairobi's Kamukunji grounds was banned. It was calling for the restoration of democracy. The planners of the rally were rounded up and detained. The U.S. Embassy granted lawyer Gibson Kamau Kuria sanctuary and facilitated his flight to exile in America. Lawyer Paul Muite also sought refuge at the embassy for nearly 3 weeks.
Those who escaped the initial arrest sought refuge at the American embassy. Kamau Kuria was granted asylum direct straight away. Raila wasn't. There were negotiations involving the various players, and eventually Norway agreed to take him. Now, the big challenge was how to get out of here to Norway. And I remember we hid him in Mukisa Kitui's house in Mountain View, from where he was able to cross over to Uganda, eventually to Europe, and then he and Kiraito and others were able to represent our interests out there.
On 16th November 1991, the Forum for the Restoration of Democracy, FORD, planned another meeting at Kamukunji. It aborted. The government summoned 7 foreign diplomats accredited to Kenya and protested over their role in the abortive meeting.
That time, Kenya was as if it was a country in a war with its own people. People are dying. Homes were burnt. People are going into exile. There's no way you could expect any foreign mission worthy its salt to just keep quiet without questioning what was really happening.
Among the summoned diplomats was USS Smith Hempston, German's Bernd Mutzelberg, Sweden's Vils Sivelius, and the British High Commissioner Sir Walter Kieran Prendergast. The envoys had protested the arrest of opposition politicians and called for their release. Hempston described the November 14th arrest of democracy movement leaders as a bloody mess.
So he became the spearhead, and within no time he was joined by Bernd Munzberg, the German ambassador. And of course the UK was split because the business community here had still vast interest within or relationship with the Kenyan business community, who were very conservative. So unlike much later on when the new High Commissioner arrived here, the initial Western ambassadorial interest was centered at the American Embassy and the German Embassy. And those two were very, very courageous. The Germans, Munzberg, was naturally pro-democracy. And many, many times when we were arrested, we would find refuge at the German Embassy. The American Embassy, we used to go there on the 4th of July to attend the Independence Day celebrations. But we had a lot of functions at the German Embassy because whenever we were not allowed to, it was never secret. Whenever we were invited there, we would do our press conferences there. And because of the inviolability of the diplomatic missions, of course, there's nothing the government could do. So they would do is just wait and arrest us.
One time when I was under serious besiegement, and my life was almost in danger, I felt I needed to go into exile. The American détaché asked me to stay in the American embassy a whole day until almost night, when we looked at ways of getting out of the embassy and what I needed to do next. They wanted to know if I really wanted to go into exile to secure myself. But I thought about my young family so much. I felt I had not done nothing to warrant me to leave the country. I was ready to go to any court. I was even ready to go to detention. The only thing I was not ready to have is death.
The government, through then head of civil service and secretary of the cabinet, Professor Philip Mbithi, issued a statement and expressed great concern and utter dismay at the open involvement of United States diplomats who have masterminded and abetted the supposed opposition movement in Kenya. In the statement, the government said exactly 10 a.m. on 16th November 1991, a convoy of about 15 cars with diplomatic number plates carrying about 25 occupants drove out of the U.S. mission with a small white car on the lead towards Kamukunji. The statement noted this kind of support by missions is contrary to accepted international rules of diplomatic conduct. Then Foreign Affairs Minister Wilson Ndolo Aya singled out Hempston as a man with a grudge and little respect for Kenya and has been personally involved with organizing dissidents in the country. He is an arrogant man. He has contempt of Africans or black people, Ndolo argued.
Hempston was just a very sociable guy. The way I took him and the way he roamed to meet people was such a person that I think he was the right person at the right time, because that was the time people were suffering.
He wasn't racist, but he used to work for an American magazine, I think, called Washington Times, that is very conservative and that had pursued racist policies in the United States. But these were not reflected in the Hempston, for example, that I knew.
Then Cabinet Secretary General Joseph Kamotho described the U.S. government's alleged participation in the Ford meeting as the highest level of foreign corruption. A Kano parliamentary group recommended that the Minister of Foreign Affairs petition alleged U.S. government's involvement in the abortive meeting. However, the U.S. State Department issued a statement saying President George Bush expressed full confidence in his ambassador and in his ability to carry out U.S. policy toward Kenya. The statement said the U.S. government encourages the right of the Kenyan people and of all peoples around the world to the basic freedoms of expression and peaceful assembly.
But the government naturally felt we were getting more sympathy. And it's true, because we were championing causes that were consistent with the causes of these governments. So naturally, sympathies were with us, but there was no funding as such.
During the Jamhuri Day celebrations in 1992, Hempston led a walkout by diplomats from Nyayo Stadium. The diplomats complained that the celebrations had been hijacked and transformed into a KANU rally. On 24th February 1993, President Daniel Moi bade farewell to Hempston. Moi said it was unfortunate that Hempston's participation in Kenya's change to multi-partism was marked by partisanship and his bias against KANU. Moi said that in a genuine democratic process, the people should be left alone to elect leaders of their choice. On 26 February 1993, Hempston wrote a farewell letter to Kenya where he pleaded guilty of being in favor of democracy, freedom and justice. He wrote, "I have never thought that freedom and liberty were items for domestic American consumption only." Hempston continued, "The blue-eyed devil with the slave owner mentality is gone, but the dream of freedom remains."
Now, our challenge, of course, has been how to maintain the momentum, because as age catches with even some of the key players who feel they have not achieved what we intended, the tendency to look for shortcuts and therefore work with forces that were not always on your side or forces that are still undermining. Because democratic change, wherever, is always facing opposition.
On his departure, Hempston was in no hurry to leave. He stayed long at the VIP lounge of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, talking to scores of well-wishers, even as reminders were sent to him to board the Lufthansa aircraft. Then came the announcement through the airport's public address system. "Passengers meet Hempston. Final announcement. Please board the aircraft." With that, Hempston and his wife Kitty walked to their plane, which took off at 12:30 p.m. In his book Rogue Ambassador, an African Memoir, Hempston claims the Kenyan government twice attempted to kill him. Multi-party elections were ultimately held in December 1992. Moi won with 36% of the vote. Hempston was disappointed that the opposition got fragmented closer to the general election.
There was a lot of divisions, but we were feeling and feeling that Jaramogi ought to be the first democratically elected president of Kenya. And then the big struggle began between the two camps, and the opposition parties disintegrated.
Why I think opposition was never able to unite that time. One, I would say money played a big role to divide the opposition. Money. People are paid not to agree. Number two, tribalism in this country is so deep. Tribalism in this country had been enhanced so much. And I believe this was a hangover from colonialism, which had divided the people to be able to rule the people. I think KANU regime also enhanced tribalism so much.
But Hempston was not the first American envoy on collision course with the government. William Atwood, the first American ambassador in Kenya, set the moral tone and tradition of diplomatic opposition to the status quo. Appointed by President John Kennedy in 1964, Atwood served a tumultuous tour at a time when the Cold War was being waged right within the Kenyan cabinet. Unflinching, Atwood put his weight behind the underdogs of the day against the state machinery. He put his reflections down in his book, The Reds and the Blacks, which was promptly proscribed by the Kenyatta regime. Like Hempston, Atwood was a trained journalist. They both moved into diplomacy with the reverence of seasoned journalists and the hide of a rhinoceros. Patrick Amimo, KTN News, Nairobi.
This is